This is a Geek Leader. Hello, world, and welcome to episode 185 of a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda, and today I'm not going to have a sponsor. What I want you to do is to use whatever time or anything you've invested in going and checking out sponsors, and just tell someone, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and thank them for the hard work that they've done and help brighten someone's day now in 2020, because I know it's been a rough year and we need to focus on making things better, making sure that 2021 starts off on a much higher note than 2020 is ending up on. And with all that being said, if you would like to leave a rating or review, please do so in Apple Podcasts. I'd greatly appreciate it. And thanks so much for your support, and happy holidays. All right, Geek Leaders, today on the show, I've got Shawn Livermore. He's the CEO of Product Perfect, and he's the best-selling author of a new book that I've got my hands on right here called The Average Joe. Shawn, welcome to the show.
Hey, John, thanks for having me.
So one thing that I'm really interested in is your background, because you've got a background in software development and technology, which is pretty much what our podcast is all about, tech leaders. If you don't mind, tell the audience kind of how you got to where you are today and how your career has kind of shaped you, and where and how that relates to this book.
Yeah, sure. So as a software engineer by trade, I spent 21 years learning the craft and ever perfecting that in a C# .NET, web-based development, front end, back end, full stack, all that good stuff. And then went from consulting to startups and then back to consulting again and launching out Product Perfect, and already seeing some great growth there. But, I'm a developer in the heart, as they say.
Awesome. So what made you decide to write a book called Average Joe, and what does that title actually mean when it comes to tech entrepreneurship and things?
I believe that the thesis of the book is very true. And the thesis tends to emanate and exude from the experience that I've had and that my fellow tech buddies have had, is this austere kind of sense of haughtiness and pride and egocentrism in the tech industry,
Mm-hmm.
and in trying to pierce the veil, of getting into that large tech, big tech, Facebook, Google, Apple, et cetera. They have a certain PhD only kind of gatekeeping mentality about them. And that really, if you peel back the layers of that, it really reveals a much larger and colorful story. And that story is about the tech genius. It's about this idea that there are some, in a binary switch way, yes or no. It's very little spectrum there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But that they have it or they don't, right? You either are the unicorn or you're nothing. You either have a PhD and you're brilliant and you're just this amazing, impressive guy, and you've got to hire that guy like right now, pay him whatever he wants, or you're nothing, you're stupid, you're an idiot, get out of here, and don't ever hire that guy. Who hired that guy, right? Or gal. So the binary nature of it is really a problem. It's endemic though.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that in different layers and ways, in the products we build, in the people we hire, in the way we go out about building tech products. And in my consulting career, I've had 21 years, 35 clients, I think, most of them and many of them large companies. And we, at Product Perfect, we take their mainframe systems and we rebuild them, and we take integrations with all sorts of products and we make them happen with either custom logic or tools. And our team and myself specifically, I just see it all the time where, you have a body of people, you look to promote those who pull the corporate line, and they do what they're supposed to do, but the innovation threads and the ideation are really reserved for the brilliant geniuses of the group. And that really is sad. It's kind of
Yeah.
it's a tragic loss, right?
Yeah,
So
for sure.
Average Joe says, hey, let's elevate. Let's really stop venerating these anomalies, and let's really elevate the average person in your IT shop and in your fellow tech buddy, the guy who just kind of sits over there and spins in his introverted cycles. Let's find a way to squeeze the creative power out of these dynamos, these secret weapons, and IT leaders out there should seriously take note. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there's so much value. in every human being, right? And there's a lot of self disqualification that happens too. So
Yeah.
it really is a book about pulling it out of the average Joe.
Well, listen I mean, when I checked out your book, there was a lot of little things that I picked up on that I really liked that I want to, that probably haven't been big topics for other conversations you've had, but I really want to key on some of those little things. Like you talk about the imposter syndrome.
Hmm.
And what I've seen with, managing developers and being a developer myself is that that happens all the time. You always think that, I'm not, I almost felt like when I was first coding, I got moved over to a SharePoint development position. And I'd never done SharePoint before, but the other people on the team had. I was, more of a Linux guy. I wrote, Perl scripts and things like that. And I said, "Oh, you'll be fine over here." And I had some great ideas, but I never would talk about them because I felt like I shouldn't be here. I'm an imposter. I'm just sitting in here because they pay me more to be over here on the SharePoint
Hmm.
team. How much of that have you seen that comes with these average Joes out there?
I think it happens all the time. It's everywhere. I mean, the imposter syndrome model we write about in the book. In fact, in the very beginning of the book, we talk about how the inventor of Linux, Linus Torvalds,
Yeah.
hope I'm saying that right. He is famous. He's called the king of geeks, the god of Linux, and he created the beginnings of Git. I mean, who does that, right? So he is kind of like the godfather. And as he writes to his fellow contributors to this amazing software that he's built, he's quoted as saying, "Hey, I'm not a nice person. I do not care about you. I care about technology and Linux, and that's what's important to me." And it comes out in his rebuttals of developers. He says, "This is just bleep," and he just rants on these guys for pages and pages at a time. Of why would you ever, you know, write code this way? And the poor little programmer that was just trying to contribute to the global phenomenon and be a part of something bigger than himself shrieks back into a shell. And I really believe that this happens all the time. These nerds with power, what are you doing? You look like an idiot yelling at another programmer about how stupid they are. It makes you look so small, right? Why not encourage and mentor and build the next generation of developers? So I highlight that as a colorful example of when the purist speaks, right? It's all condescending,
Yeah.
patronizing, tech snobbery, right? And it's not that we look for bullies to poke at them. It's just more about the rest of us that are seeking to start a new company, or looking at pitching to investors, or going to these events. There's a lot of people who buy the ticket, they go to the event, they go to the conference, they put on the lanyard, and they sit around and they listen and they get inspired and they drink their coffee and they go back to their hotel room pre-COVID, and they never do a dang thing, right? They
Yeah.
just kind of wallow in their self-pity and agonize about it. And I was like, dude, there are many, many startups that you have to get through to get to the winning startup, or there are many, many ideas you have to develop to hone in your own craft at a personal level. And if you never get on the bike, you're never going to get through that first 10 miles, right? There's quite a bit of pre-work that shapes the clay before you can really become the form that you were designed to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what a lot of people don't realize. They think all these success is overnight. I think the idea of an overnight success is really a myth, and I don't know if it was in the a book, the War of Arts, or I can't remember which book it was, but the guy talked about how sometimes you had to write 9 crappy pages to get that 10th one that's good.
Hmm.
And I feel like that's the same way when it comes to tech startups or anything. And I can think back to myself, and I got really big into building mobile phone apps back in like the early days of mobile phones, 2010, 2011 timeframe. And I probably about my eighth or ninth app actually hit something, and actually got
Hmm.
some traction. I think in a matter of like a few months, I got like 4 million downloads on that app. And so many people were like, "How did you do that? What did you do?" I'm like, "I don't know. I just I just kept building apps, and finally
Hmm.
one of them took off."
Hmm.
Do you see that people give up too soon, or kind of relinquish their desire to continue building too soon?
Actually, I think people don't give up soon enough.
Ah,
When
okay.
it comes to like product development, I kind of feel like, or innovation,
You mean like switch, like pivoting? They don't pivot.
yeah, they don't stop and ask themselves the hard questions, or actually they know intuitively that the hard questions are out there, but they
Hmm.
dysfunctionally avoid them.
Yeah.
It's almost like they're in a bad marriage with their own startup.
I
It's
think in the book you talk about inflections. Is that what you're getting at?
No,
No.
inflections is a term coined by Mike Maples, venture capitalist, which refers to kind of seeing the future and being able to codify that into a key phrase
Hmm.
fitting into one of four types. We can go into that if you'd like, but I
Well,
wanted to talk about iteration real quick, if that's all right.
yeah, absolutely.
So I go back to Churchill, and any history buffs out there, a lot of the tech audience loves history too, just because their brain is well calibrated for it. But Churchill loved to iterate, and he had triple spaced his papers, right? So his
Hmm.
secretary was used to this last minute, all night. Everything was just very unpredictable and all over the place. And he'd go down these rabbit holes, and the Abraham Lincoln version of that was that Abraham Lincoln would keep scraps of paper that he'd write down in his hat. He'd literally pull his hat off, pull out 20 scraps of paper, throw them on the desk wherever he was traveling, and put his speech together. And I kind of feel like there's this nonstop, progressive, always on switch in the back of our brain. And this is what I worked with a neuroscience scientist out
Hmm.
of UCLA to really develop the slow create framework. And that is a slow fumbling that we do, the slow development of our ideation cycles in a systematic way to continue to progress on things that have been torturing your mind for years, right?
Hmm.
And the ideator and the entrepreneur has this fire in the belly, and the fire never goes out, right? So you're constantly fighting that fire. Either you're flaming it and it's growing, or you're extinguishing it and paying the mortgage, right? Doing your day job. But the systematic way of developing and iterating and pushing that ball up the mountain, it is much in a greater way, much more revealed to yourself as you put it into the canvas and pipeline and triad, and move them through from left to right, the process of ideation. And so I'm excited to put that into the book. I'm excited to have slowcreate.com, and we're working on all the animations and the pieces of this, but I think it's very helpful to figure out when to give up and when to keep going. And like I have like 16 things that I'm pushing forward right now, very, very incrementally and slowly, and we'll see which seed kind of sprouts. But
So,
it's yeah.
can you explain what this slow create framework is exactly?
So when working with this Dr. Jesse
Yeah.
Rissman, PhD out of UCLA, he and I spent months and
Hmm.
months together and many, many Zoom calls when COVID first hit. And he's a good friend, and I credit him with a lot of the neuroscience that we had to really put bake into the cake here. But we asked the question: is there a framework that the average Joe can use, that anyone can pick up and say, you know what, I'm practicing neuroscience to ideate? Because ideation was typically reserved for the creative or the right brainers, the colorful people, whereas all us introverts sit in the corner and just write our boring code, which is obviously not true. I mean, we do so much creative work. But so the slow create framework was designed to allow you to push out of your brain into a canvas, into, like, if you've heard of the business model canvas, for example,
Yeah.
and you plot out your ideation and the problem domain and the factors and the influences and all the pieces of that. And you can go to slowcreate.com to download all the free, it's all free. So the PDFs, the animations, the videos, it's all out there. And once on the canvas, your brain is basically doing what's called baiting the hook. So when you go into these kind of daydreams, right? When you drift, when you're doing the dishes, when you're taking a shower, when you're on a long walk or on a long car drive, maybe you're listening to this podcast, you're on the car, you're zoning out, your brain shuts off what's called the executive control network, your decision-making frameworks, and
Hmm.
it flips on a switch called the default mode network, which is a term that refers to all the specialty areas of the brain that are running and operating at full speed. I'm not talking about like the slow cranking mechanism. I'm talking about 60 to 80% of all the energy in your brain is sucked in by this default mode network when you're daydreaming. Okay, that's when all the activity happens. It's synthesizing, it's ideating, it's filling in the gaps. All of that effort is to your benefit. But a lot of us aren't taking advantage of those cycles, right? And we call it mindfulness, we call it meditation, and CEOs are going off on these streets and putting on white robes and staring at bodies of water, and that's all great, but you're really practicing. If you took a piece of paper and you learned how to systematically format all that, you're practicing it while you're doing the dishes and the kids screaming and the wife's talking to you about their day, or the husband or whoever. It's pragmatic, systematic, and effortless, and it costs you nothing, right? And
Yeah.
it allows you to stack them in a canvas. Then the canvases stack up in a pipeline. And then you look at the pipeline throughout the week and you're baiting the hook, right? So
Hmm.
you continue to effortlessly go through that and then synthesizing various different ideas that you've had, never losing anything, never forgetting anything that you've worked through, whether it's an idea or a problem. Those are the two categories, ideas or problems, kind of generally speaking. And then the triad at the end of that, once it comes out of the pipeline, you might have an inflection or a moment of euphoria where you're like, I got it. You put that into the triad and you learn how in chapter 10 and 11 and 9, toward the end of the book, we learn how to communicate that to friends, family, those around us, and investors, right? And so the format of your words, the crystallization of your vision, and the beautification of what is very complex and very hard to explain, and formatting and codifying and regurgitating that in a way that anyone could understand, that's a craft. That's a craft. And you can learn how to do that. And that's where intelligence and creativity drop off the map, and the style of communication and the craft of communication becomes infinitely more important. And I think all the developers out there be nodding their heads right now, like
Yeah.
communication is a black box. It is so hard. It is so hard. But with this framework, anyone can do it.
And that's so when you talk about that and communicating, I've always found like communicating was difficult for me, but it's one of those things that the more I practice, the better I got at it.
Mhm.
And I found that sometimes being able to sit down and talk with your peers is different than communicating like in giving a speech or talking at a conference or meetup or something like that. So you have to kind of practice both. And sometimes it's one-on-ones will help with that. So doing one-on-ones with my team has been helpful for that reason, but also just being able to write down your thoughts and write down how you want to explain something in a certain way. You talk about the sustainable Mystique triad, with narrow focus, articulate speech, and interesting problems. What exactly is that, and how does that relate?
So the triad takes everything that you worked on in your subject matter, your patterns, details, and secrets, and it helps you to synthesize that into a matrix of thoughts, words, concepts that anyone from the outside can understand. And it's that simple model in a triangle. On the bottom, you have interesting problems. On the left side, you have a narrow focus, and on the right side, you have articulate speech. And each of those means a little more than the common phrase. And I go into that on the website, in the book, and the videos. But exemplifying that in the dinner question, what do you do? Right? You're at a dinner party, someone walks up, hey, what do you do? Hey, how's it going? I'm a software developer, but I'm an entrepreneur and I have a startup, and but I also, and there's like five things, right? But
Right.
you're like, how could I possibly leave one out, right? So really, that's the problem. And a great example, or what's your pitch? And the whole pitch deck, and let's get slides, and well,
Yeah.
we're working on the deck, and I got a co-founder. Yeah, but what is the pitch? What's your company? What's your idea? What's your startup? What's your movement? So the triad helps you to say, look, in the fewest words humanly possible, with the greatest amount of impact, so that when the other person hearing you speak walks away and says, oh my God, I have got to introduce you to everyone I've ever met in all my life. And I've got to fund your organization. And I need to put every dime that I've earned, taxed dollars, into your high risk startup because what you just said blew my mind. And that's the triad. And the pitch and the deck and all the different things you need for raising money and building your team and getting the movement going, that's all secondary. The triad has to come first because I would humbly present because, and I say that from, well, who are you to tell me to try that, Shawn? So I've raised money 6 times. Yes, it's seed money, but hey, seed money's hard to raise.
It's very
If you're
hard.
talking about,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, round A, round B, well, you've already
That's
got
probably the
momentum
hardest
on.
actually, because you have to, seed money, you have to get started.
Oh my gosh,
You
you're
don't have a
convincing.
product yet, usually.
Totally, often. And you're convincing dentists and lawyers to give up their boat money and their kids' college fund money to put into a fund that goes into the highest possible risk, of their portfolio. That's really hard to do. And
Yeah.
the bar is set really high, right? So done it 6 times over a couple startups, learned so many lessons in those processes. I pitched over 130 times. So I understand. I've been through Techstars and Amplify Los Angeles and learned a lot from Y Combinator buddies and interviewed a lot of very powerful people in the tech industry that have shaped culture and movements, like Sean Ellis, who coined the phrase growth hacking. It is amazing when you put it all together and you present it in a simple model, what the feedback that I've gotten is like, hey man, this is really transformative. So the triad really helps you get there.
Awesome. And one of the things I really liked about your book is you tell stories you talk about Dropbox and how Dropbox got started with, a problem, right? Trying to solve that problem. And I really like the simplicity of being able to communicate with a story. How have you seen that helping entrepreneurs and things start out by having that good story?
Well, story is everything. Um, we look at a couple different people who have learned how to master telling that story. Um, the book goes into the model for storytelling, and I call it crossing the chasm. A lot of us nerds, we have all the data. Data is
Mhm.
great. Data is fact, right? It's so fun to look at data because you're like, I can rely on you. Yes, you're my friend. I can stand on you. I can feel good about you. But when we talk about story, it's so easy to go down this colorful journey of fear, right? And there are very great examples of when people have lost themselves in trying to tell that story and they failed miserably and they totally blew it. Thankfully, though, there are scientific versions of stories that the data brain can get their hands around, like the circle that Star Wars was built on, the ability to um, Campbell's journey. I'm so sorry. Campbell's journey. Joseph Campbell had built this model that Luke goes away, comes back, and there's like 6 or 7 different steps of that hero's journey, and it really has formed novels and science fiction and all sorts of television for decades and even a generation beyond. And that's only one of like 6 or 7 different models to tell stories. But crossing the chasm says I'm going to go from having all this information to picking up a red paintbrush and striking the canvas. And that act is courageous. It is courageous to strike a canvas with red paint. But I would challenge any readers or listeners, pick up the brush, learn how to tell a story. Anything you're doing becomes more powerful. And there's a lot of anecdotes and quotes I can throw at you, but I won't bore you with all of them. It's all in chapter 9. But in order to cross that chasm, and the most important one is a founding myth. So the founding myth is who I am, what am I doing, and why that turned into a startup, a company, right? There's a lot of great examples of founding myths, but I I would encourage you to try to learn how to come up with your own. But it's your personal business story. It's where you go from problem solver to storyteller, you know, and you can't dish out all the sales stuff on somebody else. Well, I hired a co-founder to be my sales guy. Yeah, that's not really how it works. You have to be the story. It's embodied in you as a founder, right?
So your book kind of analyzes some of the myths of tech genius, and you said you've been called that before, a tech genius. And what is some of the claims that are out there for tech genius, and kind of what is how does your book relate and talk about that?
Yeah, so the tech genius idea came when one of my clients had said, Shawn, you are a tech genius, when I was at the whiteboard. And I'm like,
Mhm.
what did you just say? And why did you say it? So really kind of stopped me in my tracks, made me, no, I'm not. But wait, yes, I am. If he thinks I am, then I am, right? And it doesn't matter what I think. So in the moment was this weird kind of, but it really planted a seed in the back of my head, and I slow created on that idea even. But it was um, it was months later that I kind of came to the realization of what this really meant, and it meant something larger. But it was how I was communicating complexity. And if you could learn how to communicate complexity, you're a tech genius. But it spanned way farther than that. But there are 6 claims that I come up with for the tech genius. Number one is that you have to be a genius. You have to have high intelligence levels to be a tech genius. Of course, that's false, right? The bar
Right.
chart is only average, and all these people out there have systematically tried to figure out, well, what is their blood types and who are all these geniuses and where do they live? Who's their dad? Who's their mom? Did they sleep a lot? Did they eat certain things? No,
Yeah. I know when I first read Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers, and he talked about Bill Gates and Steve Jobs both being born around the same time, and I was like, oh man, I missed the boat. There's no way I'm going to be a success in tech because I don't fit those criteria. But I think you just missed that.
No, it's totally true. I mean, there's a lot of geniuses out there. I love the story of Michael Kearney. Michael Kearney was
Oh yeah.
this amazing dude out of the Midwest, and he had, a 200 IQ. When he was 4 months old, he was already doing things as a baby that you wouldn't even believe. At 6 months old, he told his own pediatrician, I have an ear infection in my left ear. I mean, you think about that for a second. If you have kids out there, 6 months old?
My 6-year-old still doesn't get his left and right correct.
He graduated college at 10 years old.
That's
Just
crazy.
pause on that for a second. And, he asked his mom, and it's 4 months old, that what he did at 4 months was actually asking his mom and dad, Mom, Dad, what's for dinner? Literally asking. So there's this freak of science factor in his life. What did he do? Well, he finished up college, got all his degree. He hung out in academia. The news cameras followed him around for years in the 80s and whatnot. He went and did some other things, but coming back to what he wanted and where he was heading, he's today doing improv in the Midwest, in Nashville. And you may say, well, good for him. And I say, yeah, exactly. Good for him.
Yeah.
Let him pursue his passions. I love that. But he says, let everyone else solve all those other problems. And why does he say that? Because the smartest guy in the room knows that these other problems can be solved by those less smart than him. That should be really encouraging. But the genius factor has really only been maybe 20%. I always quote it as 20% of the factor. You don't have to have extremely high levels of intelligence to do great work. You just have to be very narrowly scoped and a couple of other things. But that should encourage you, because I think a lot of people are very insecure about their intelligence, and they disqualify solely based on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree 100%. Like, intelligence is so relative depending on where you're at. And, I grew up and I was a C student pretty much up until, 10th grade. And then I realized then that if I stay a C student, I'm probably not going to get a scholarship. And if I don't get a scholarship, I'm not able to afford college. So I got to figure something out. And it wasn't because of intelligence. It was more because of hard work that the grades changed, I believe there. The second thing you talk about is creativity, and the myth is that it's sudden and inspired. And you also talk about your big C and little c. Do you want to talk a little bit about creativity?
Totally. So this idea that I'm not creative, right? Or I have to be a certain level of creative in order to hit the mark. And if I was creative, I'd be a designer. The creatives sit over there, is what they say, and the nerds on the left and the creative designers on the right. But actually, the creative model, this I've got like 10 things going on in my brain here. The magic dust of creativity, this idea that some people can do it and some people can't. It's like when you sit down to draw, oh, I'm not good at drawing. Right. Well, that's fine. Well, if you look at any artist class, they take you through iterations of stroking that marker on the page. And I took a class actually just to kind of understand how it works. And the artist instructor said, now I want you to take that charcoal and continue to go over your same strokes over and over again for about an hour, and I'll come back to you. It's like, no, I want to learn how to draw the bird really well the first time. He's like, no, I want you to iterate on that. I'm like, iterate? Well, I might as well teach myself, right? And so art is really more aligned with process and a science of procedural steps as compared and contrasted to a person. So the juxtaposition is the person versus the process. And all of us get so hung up on the person, again, back to the binary yes, no switch. Am I or am I not creative? Am I or am I not a genius, right? Am I or am I not a rock star tech founder meant to launch rockets into space? That is the progressive transitive logic tree, and we have to break the cycle, right? So the big C creativity is the fallacy that in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye, like the fraudulent Mozart letter in the 1800s that was written about how Mozart came up with his work. And the letter goes something like this. It says, in a moment, in a twinkling, after a good meal, after a long walk, I come back and I sit down, and all of a sudden I feel this euphoric sense of writing something down, and this composition comes to me complete without any change from what, it rarely differs, he says, what was written down from what actually comes out in the keys. Now that letter has been pointed back to as a definition of creative genius or creativity or brilliance. And it was a fraud. It wasn't real. It wasn't written by Mozart at all. But so many books had already written about it that the cat's out of the bag. And so we point back to moments of epiphany and euphoria, eureka, and all of that is pretty much false. The most you're going to get is a little mini C creative moment, which is that synthesis we talk about in the So Create framework. We teach you how to get to systematically, where you go from idea to baiting the hook to walking down the mindless work ladder to feeling that small little nibble. We call it a nibble of synthesis. Why a nibble? It's like you're fishing. So you cast the reel out there and you get a little bit of a tug, right? Oh, wait, I should try it this way. Or, oh, wait, what if I invert the paradigm and I go the other way with the velocity or the magnetism or whatever it is? Or, oh, the way someone said it in a podcast or in a stage that I was about at a conference, the way they framed that idea changes how I think about this other idea, tangential to my idea, which is totally different industry. Anyway, so Jesse Rissman in his work at UCLA is far more qualified to discuss the paradigms within neuroscience. But as a novice to the topic, I have learned so much from him, and I would say that baiting the hook is the most important thing you can do as a founder as you begin to work through your mental cycles. But that's the creative. We touch on so much more in the book, but that's the gist of it.
Yeah. And I've always thought like developers are creative, and when you're writing code, you're being extremely creative. And I talked about it in a TED talk I gave in 2015 about how we are all creative. If you solve problems on a daily basis, you're creating solutions. You are coming up with a new and unique thing. And I see so many people still today, even at conferences, that they'll say, "Oh, I'm not creative at all. I'm just a coder." I'm like, "God, you're selling yourself so short."
That's so true. We're all creative, and the selling yourself short is exactly another reason why I wrote the book. Is I just know so many very talented developers and engineers and designers and people and launching their ideas in their minds, but not in the real world. And so it's powerful to empower a whole nother generation of creators.
Yeah. So the next one is secrets are elusive. So what secrets and how are they so elusive?
So when Sean Ellis, the tech genius archetype, walks into Dropbox in '08, and he is welcomed by 8 engineers who were trying to build the product of the century, he took in his back pocket, 6 months later, he had a secret in his back pocket. And this was something that Jamie Siminoff, the founder of Ring Doorbell, bought by Amazon for $1 billion. He had told Sean Ellis in a coffee conversation a while back, and Ellis kind of held on to that secret. It was the most powerful little phrase. It was only like 6 or 7 words, but it permeated his brain. It stuck in there. Ellis was doing experiments in the model of A/B testing and what he does so well of creating a culture of experimentation with growth hacking. I highly recommend his book, Hacking Growth, on Amazon. And sat down with him for a couple hours in 2019 in Newport Beach, and we had a great conversation about what really happened. And what really happened was the principle of mutual benefit. That was the secret. And so these secrets, you don't know when they're going to hit you, right? You're talking to different people. You're isolating information in your brain. You're cataloging it. You've got this database running, right, at all times. But the secrets that you receive, you don't recognize them as secrets until you need them, right? So you have this model of secret inventory that I would refer to, that it's like this quiver of arrows behind you. So Ellis drops in this principle of mutual benefit to one of the marketing experiments, and instead of a 5 or 10% spike, he got a 300% spike that day. And that 300% spike turned into a series of, they just took that one and they blew it to pieces with 100 different versions of it. And they found the 3 or 4 that worked the best, and it took Dropbox. It helped, I should say. The founder, Houston, is a brilliant mind, and I'll butcher his co-founder's name, Farashadowski. But they did such a great job building a masterful product. And even Ellis points back to the product and says, that's, we all use Dropbox. We all love it. But that took Dropbox from a couple million in value to 8 or 10, 11 billion in value, and then peaked at, I think, 14 billion in value. And he was a huge part of that that reason of perpetual growth. But the secrets, they emanate from PDS cycles. I call them PDS, which stands for patterns, details, and secrets.
Mm-hmm.
And this patterns and details many times will leak out secrets. So if your subject matter, the clay of your hands, is agriculture technology, I always go back to that one because it's so out there, it's away from the cubicle. Or if it's automotive, engines or electrical battery technology, there's so many great new forays, frontiers in technology. That subject matter, that's your clay. And in your clay are your secrets, and it's there. And people will talk about these, these inside knowledge, kind of the curse of knowledge, as Gladwell refers to it, as the printer error codes or the copy machine error codes in his book. But no one knows what you're talking about. Well, the GFI and the TRS and whatnot, and you go onto these rabbit trails of crazy words that no one's really deciphering. But in the midst of that, in that alphabet soup, you can stir that up. And I bet you, if you force someone, put a gun to their head and said, "Tell me a secret of your business right now," you could probably come up with 3 or 4.
Mm-hmm.
And they're there. And I just think that we have to be a little more aware of that content, of that clay, and write them down. And you never know when the Siminoff secret will come to you.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, ties in real well with the next one, which is growth is magic. And we know, growth is not magic. So how do your secrets kind of help you with your growth?
Yeah. So the Dropbox miracle, as they call it, right. And they look at Ellis as this magic magician. And I say the word magic too, is because you have venture capitalists by Tim Draper, who said, a good founder is like a magician. He's like creating a groundswell, something from nothing, literally something from nothing. And us founders, we look around, we're like, well, how do I do that? How do I whip up magic and impress them? Well, I guess I better lie like Elizabeth Holmes, right? Like, better create Theranos, which does nothing, and raise a 1.4 billion and then be faced with federal charges. Let's not do that, guys.
How messed up is that? I mean, that documentary, oh man, just
blows your mind.
It does. I can't even believe like so many people invested and just like there was no proof.
Terrible.
Gosh,
It's
I guess
terrible,
when you dress the part and you talk the talk, you can fool a lot of people.
Yep. And so coming back to growth is magic. It's procedural, right? It's a model of A plus B equals C, and marketing tech out there, that whole industry or subgenre that Ellis has helped to spawn, has its own kind of dichotomy of thought around multiple buckets within that. So there's a little bit of magic, sure. Well, everyone has a little magic dust, a couple of things they do differently, and experimental models that they've tried. I mean, that's what differentiates one company versus another, and many times the one founder versus another. But in essence, the first principles are still true, that you're procedurally going through a scientific method of some sort that is going to create or not create a sense of value. And that value, as ethereal and vaporized as it may be at times, is measurable. So anything you can measure is not magic. And we have to remind ourselves sometimes, even the best of us, we get caught up in the mystery of it. So we talk about growth, we talk about the essence of it, and then pull back and talk about flow and the flow state, and how the magical feelings that you get when you're building things, you don't really need any of that, right? It kind of dovetails into some other topics, but yeah, it's certainly not magic.
Yeah, definitely not. And now the fifth thing you claim that you're checking out is the introverted thinking. I openly say that I'm very much an introvert, but how does that relate to the introverted thinking?
So I'm gonna take a step back and correct you on this one. So it's actually introverted. It's contrarian.
Oh, okay.
Inverted.
Gotcha.
Right? So let's talk about that. So inverted thinking, right? So a paradigm shifter, right? So you have people like Bezos. We have Jobs. We have other guys that have come along and said, you know what, we're going to just flip it on its head. We're going to take a model I love Satoshi Nakamoto and what he did with Bitcoin. And that's kind of the hallmark of the inverted thinker, is to say, you know what, global financial system, I'm going to totally, I mean, you're talking about the largest entity, behemoth, that you could possibly challenge is the global financial system. We're talking Barclays and Neiman and all these large industries with hundreds and hundreds of billions, even trillions of dollars that you're up against. And here I am, a lonely little coder for a couple years in quiet and complete silence, building out Bitcoin, posting it to this crypto thread and saying, hey, here's a little project I have. And then, on Halloween night, no less, under a full moon, pushing it out there in 2008, and that thing kind of being left in obscurity to languish. But no, it was contrarian minded, well thought out, and had a whole series of psychological wind at its back that helped to position it. And a couple different events kind of helped to spike the contrarian creation. But anyone can be a contrarian. Anyone can learn how to, but I'm a rule follower. I do the right thing. I'm a W2 employee. I'm putting into my 401k, and I'm paying my mortgage, and I'm not taking the handouts, and I'm doing all the right things. Well, that's cool. But you can learn how to become a contrarian by taking certain paradigms and learning a couple of keywords, phrases, and techniques, and inverting paradigms. And that's a part of any great business model, right? So I think also of people like Blackbeard, the pirate who would jump onto these ships with burning sulfur in their beard, right? And he inverted the paradigm by just creating branding. I mean, he said, hey, get afraid really quickly, drop your weapons, and I'm going to take over your booty, and I'm going to, your ship is mine, ha ha ha. And that was brilliant branding, and they did it. They dropped their swords and they gave up. And so he would just go from ship to ship with sulfur in the beard and create this kind of magic around him, which kind of ties into some of the other stuff we're talking about, the mystique, the next claim.
Yeah. So let's move right into that, because what is this mystique that like Blackbird, a great example with the sulfur. How does that all relate, and how do we disprove that? So
what is that mystique? Well, it's that euphoric kind of cloud of favor that investors grant founders. My associate Son from SoftBank, when Adam Newman signed a term sheet for billions of dollars after a brief car ride, what the freak did he say to that guy?
Exactly.
And how do I do that, right? And Adam Newman's laughing. He's like, cool, and there's an iPad that they whipped out and a little thing, and they signed the thing with their finger, and all of a sudden he raised like $4 or $6 billion or something ridiculous, right? And Son has been famous for making some interesting investments. Of course, he picked a lot of great winners too. But he looks at it like the sparkle in the eye. He's even quoted as talking about, this sparkle thing. And people have kind of looked at that over time and seeing what is the metric for that sparkle, and how successful did they really become. But there are a few successful moments of gut check, and I just felt it for this founder. And why did they do it? Because they have this mystique about them. And so sustainable mystique is this model, before I go into the anti method, the actual problem, the mystique problem, right? Number one is, well, is it real? Number two is, if it's real, how do I do it? And number three is, well, if it's not real, then are they frauds, right? Well, Elizabeth Holm, I believe, was lying, right?
Yeah, total fraud.
Total, right? Like, I don't know if I'm going to get sued by her. I doubt it, because she's got the mountain of evidence against her, right? And if anyone's watched any of these documentaries, they're laughing, because it's like, what's wrong with you, woman? Like,
yeah.
But her family friend psychologist said, oh my gosh, I should have stepped in. He's there's some pathology there. There's some serious psychosis happening. I saw something when she was younger, but I didn't step in. So there may be some mental illness happening there. I'm not sure, but the low voice and here's my invention. I mean, come on, right? And it's so simple to see it in retrospect, but she was trying to do it. She was trying to create the mystique, right? Because she didn't have it. So she was one of us, but she actually tried to do it. And that's how bad it turns out. So don't try to fake mystique, okay? So what I created was a sustainable mystique. It's a triad. It helps you communicate what is really there. It's a model for emitting to the universe data, fact, and not fiction. And it's fair, it's real, it's just getting better at your craft of using your tongue and communicating. And so the sustainable seek model creates a lasting feeling that burns clean, that's full of vitamins and nutrients.
So going into that sustainable Mystique triad, you talk about articulate speech, and that's the one thing that I struggle, I think, the most with. And I watch your videos that you put up, and you speak so eloquently. You have that great articulate speech. How does one kind of develop and work on that?
I appreciate you saying that. I don't feel that I do, but
And maybe that's everybody. When they listen to themselves, they don't think they do. But when other people are
Mhm.
listening to you, we definitely think you do.
Yeah, it's cool. Well, there's people like Demosthenes, the ancient Athenian senator who put rocks in his mouth and shaved his head and went into a cave and came out the other side as a great speaker, right? And
Yeah, I want
I
to
think
skip
all of
that.
us, yeah, the rocks don't taste good. I tried, but these speech impediments are real. And if you have some of those, hey, if you're listening, go to a therapist, get some help, go to a coach. Even if you're the greatest speaker in the world, you can always improve and
Yeah.
listen to yourself. As painful as it is, I try to do this. Oh, it cringes me greatly and I cry. What kind of an idiot am I? How could I said something so stupid? But I have to listen to myself on audio. Even right now, the idea of listening to your own voice, you may be cringing just at the idea of that, but that's how powerful that is. And outlining your problem set and then going to a professional coach and with the outlining saying, this is what I'm doing. Help me improve, right? But sustainable esteem and articulate speech specifically is not just articulate speech. I use the API method, not application programming interface, but I use that acronym because we all know what API in the engineering world means. But
Mhm.
analogy, portrayal, and inversion, that's what I call articulate. So what do I mean by that? Well, analogy is to take any communicated data, any information of its plain vanilla form, and turn that into a real world analogy. Simple, right? So,
Mhm.
hey, it's like A is like B. It's kind of like when a bird flies, it does this. Well, that's how my product works. It's kind of like a car when it slows down and you feel that crunch at the stop moment. Well, that's how my product works, right? Creating analogy. Okay, P, portrayal. The ability with your hands, your words, your motions, your slides, your visuals, any sort of perceivable sensory input to communicate the analogy, that's portrayal. And so if you have 4 or 5 different models for it and you pick which ones you feel work best, or you use a combination of them with A/B testing, that really hones in on the proper portrayal. And then I, inversion, the ability to take what they think they just heard and flip it on its head, again, the contrarian mind at work, and invert the paradigm that they didn't expect. Now, this is hard to do because you have to work backwards. You have to first start with inversion and then think about a portrayal that would fit the inversion that you're about to perform, and then go back to A for analogy and backfill that. So as you get better at the API method and you present information, you'll become a great speaker as well because you're learning how to surprise that audience and rock their world with that one word or that one phrase that you
Mhm.
drop on them that they weren't expecting. This works magically. And actually, if you watch people who are great speakers, they do it already. They just probably don't realize they're doing it. Or if they do, they package it in a different way. But it's a very easy thing to follow. And I'm going to have some more on the website soon about how that API method has been exemplified in videos and commercials and television and movies. Writers, my sister-in-law is a writer, a lot of big shows she's done in Hollywood. And we talk a little bit about this. And she's done a great job of taking an idea and just inverting the paradigm when you don't expect it. But I think movies, every time you watch a movie, think of the API method and try to document in your mind an example that you can refer back to.
Yeah, for sure. And thinking back on it, there's been so many great talks with like, I think of one of my favorite, TED talks of all time is Simon Sinek's, circle, and think about how he used analogies all throughout that, and the portrayal of the Wright brothers and folks, and he kind of took you from thinking from the outside in, and where he used inversion the way you sell a product, the way Apple sells a product isn't the same way
Mhm.
that Dell would sell the same product.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely see that, and I can kind of see how you codified a lot of the things that folks are, brilliant speakers are doing.
Thank you. Yeah, Sinek is great. And I think start with why, that inner circle of why you're doing something.
Hmm.
Yeah.
No one cares about the what. The what comes later, but the core mission and the why, it really does glow out of the founder, right? You
Yeah.
glow with your why.
And I think when you talk about using an analogy, if you can explain something that's highly technical to someone that's not technical at all, using an
Mm.
analogy or something like that, it makes it seem like you have mastered that technical thing in a way that makes it so simple.
Right. And the beauty of it is that you don't have to be the number one expert of, whatever, your subject matter is in the world. You just have to be the number one best communicator of that subject matter. So the brilliance factor out the window, the intelligence psychometric scores out the window. No one cares about that anymore. All they care about is the way you said it. The way you said it blows my mind. And that's why I'm paying you more than I'm paying the next guy. That's why
Yeah.
you get the project and the next guy doesn't, because I like how you speak.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is definitely a skill that a lot of us developers like, I go back to, I teach part-time at Winthrop University. And I go back to, the college, and we don't really teach our students how to speak much. Like at Winthrop, if you're a computer science major, you're going to take one class where you have to give really do real presentations. And outside of that, you may have like a small, 5-minute speech at the end of the semester or something like that. But we really need to focus on helping our developers, future developers, I guess, computer science majors learn how to communicate outside of just writing code.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing they have to start with is the bottom of the triad, and that's interesting problems. And I'd love to
Mhm.
give you a quick example. Okay,
Yeah, do it.
here are a couple fun examples of how someone can narrow their scope from boiling the ocean or trying to solve global warming by opening their windows and turning on the air conditioning. Okay, here's how to do it. You narrow your scope. So here's an example. Here's a couple. I've collected snails for years, and now I finally narrowed down the protein that makes a snail glide. And we can use this specific protein to ... whatever it
Mhm.
might be. Okay, here's another one. I'm the first person to inject polyurethane into live white blood cells. And because of this, I can simulate the reverse engineering of a disease capture formula, ... right? So I'm the first. I've studied this for 10 years. I'm the most expert on this topic, or in my group of professionals, insert name here, I am the lead blah, blah, blah on this, right? So the credibility grab is always important. Here's another one. I've been stumped for years trying to figure out how to get the price of a GPS microchip down to under $20. But now with this new innovation, insert innovation here, or this new trend, insert trend here, or inflection, right? We can get there with a series of steps. We just need the funding to blah, blah, blah. Or
Mhm.
here's another one. Bill Gates. The hardest part about, he didn't quote this, I'm just pretending that he would say this based on his research and work. The hardest part about dealing with mosquitoes is that they're almost impervious to lights or sprays. But through the foundation, we found a way to modify their DNA in order to kill their other fellow mosquitoes, which is kind of actually what they did
Yeah,
to kill
didn't they just
mosquitoes.
do that in Florida? Didn't they just release
Hmm.
yeah, some genetically modified, which is great for 2020. Who knows what that's going to end up at, hopefully.
Totally, totally. Or here's one last one. Okay, so here's a person who's creating a shipping company. He's pitching to investors, but instead of talking about the shipping company and their team and whatnot, here's how he creates interesting problems by speaking. He says, quote, I've been experimenting and researching with how to decrease the weight of cardboard to lower e-commerce shipping costs for airline freight, specifically cargo in airlines, right? I believe we can lower that cardboard from 1 ounce to 0.8 ounces. I mean, we're talking about a difference of such a subtle difference that no one would even notice, but we get to that microcosm of investment. There is a huge billions of dollars of differential between 1 ounce and 0.8 ounces, for example. I'm just making this up, but there are
Yeah.
many industries where that is a true fact.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Shawn, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. How can people find out more about you and follow you and check out your videos and get a copy of the book?
Head over to the website, averagejoetechgenius.com. It's on Amazon best-selling list. We have slowcreate.com for the Slow Create framework, and you can follow me on social from those websites at the bottom. So, but that's really it.
Awesome. And you guys can, I'll link up all that in the show notes at geekleader.com, as well as a link to the best-selling book, Angry Joe, Be the Silicon Valley Tech Genius. Shawn,
Average Joe.
Is that, did I say that wrong?
Yeah, angry. Yeah,
Angry Joe. That's book number 2.
yeah. It could be angry, I guess.
Yeah, so check out the Average Joe, and I'll link that up in the show notes. It'll also be at geekleader.com where books from our authors are found. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Shawn. Really appreciate it.
John, thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed that episode, please leave a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. I'd greatly appreciate that. And also, don't forget to check out merch. We have some T-shirts that I've designed that are on at geekleader.com. You can click on the merchandise section there and check that out. And also, don't forget about the books from our guests. So if you like this guest and other guests that have written books, please go ahead and check that out at geekleader.com. I would greatly appreciate it, and I'm sure they would too.